Thank you for everyone that's joined us live, for those that may watch the recording of this later. For this webinar on secure AI and GovCloud integration for aerospace and defense manufacturing. Today, I'm going to be presenting. My name is Andrew Scheuermann. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Arch Systems, a company dedicated for intelligent actions in manufacturing and serving aerospace and defense. And I'm also joined by Eric Krock. Eric, maybe you could briefly introduce yourself as well.
Hi, I'm Director of Sales Engineering Enablement at Arch Systems. I work with customers on aligning our solutions to their needs, and defense and aerospace is one of the customer segments I work with.
Excellent. We're just going to do a very brief introduction of Arch that's hosting this webinar and then move into the content. Arch Systems is a team of manufacturing and data experts. So not just a manufacturing company or an AI company, an AI for manufacturing company to drive intelligent actions. We have architects in 13 countries around the world, shown in blue on the map. We serve factories in 15 different countries with a focus on North America, where, among other industries, aerospace and defense is a special focus of the work that we do. One of the things that we're talking about in this is the value of AI, and this webinar is focused on a lot of the challenges at getting to AI. But just to kick us off, we're going to start in the factory here just briefly. And we're using an example today of an electronics assembly line, a surface mount technology line. This is a line that some of you may be familiar with, others may be less so, where you start with the green PCBs, inside of our computers and our phones and other things, the motherboards without chips on top. They're loaded into the beginning of the process, which often begins with laser marking and or solder paste printing, which is done in a machine, such as this ASM deck in front of us. Boards are inspected. All kinds of chips and components are placed on them rapidly by robotics. This particular line has a SciPlace ASM pick-and-place machine. They're inspected, they're baked, and they're moved into box build at the end. So one of the different kinds of processes, among other things such as semiconductor packaging, injection molding, CNC, final assembly, test and pack, repair, and other sorts of processes often carried out in aerospace and defense manufacturing. Now, when you succeed the goal of what we're going to be talking about in this webinar, and you are actually able to collect data from all kinds of different machines, MESs, and systems, and pull them together into a unified data model, you're at first able to build kind of ugly, but actually very data impressive dashboards like this one, where you have every state, every error code from different machines and systems that could all be put on a single pane of glass, so to speak, a single dashboard. So here we're looking at all the information from this SMT line, lots of different makes and models of machines, different vendors, different protocols, all in a single dashboard. What's so exciting about this is not that you can build an ugly dashboard, but that once it is capable of being put on a dashboard, you don't need to use the dashboard because now you can leverage AI to do amazing things with information, such as auto root causing problems, auto identifying problems, predictive alerts, and prescriptive guidance. For example, identifying that two error codes are anonymously firing, automatically opening a ticket, bringing that ticket to the right technician in the factory who is less experienced and doesn't know what to do, but they're handy. And so it says, you need to check the motor on the pick and place. And they say, okay, I'm handy. I know what that is. No, thumbs down. That's not actually the problem here. Connection. No, that's not it either. And then the guidance says, well, check an obstacle. A chip might have fallen into the track. Need to get a vacuum cleaner and suck it out, and the robot will be able to slide again. And they say, oh, that actually works. And so you're able to build these learning systems that might have exactly the guidance that people need to make faster fixes, improve mean time to repair, overall OEE and yield. And when the systems don't know yet, people can start putting feedback into them. They can rapidly learn and transform the way that we're doing manufacturing today. Okay, so now the bulk of what we want to talk about in the webinar is not specific AI use cases, although they're extremely exciting, but the unique challenges that stand in our way to achieve these. And we'll take this into full screen for the rest of the webinar here. What are some of the unique challenges that are faced in aerospace and defense manufacturing? First, there's a set of challenges that can be grouped in data accessibility and connectivity. Getting to that first just ugly looking dashboard where all the data is unified is amazingly challenging. It's very much like an iceberg, where the tip of the iceberg are these amazing AI use cases that the COOs and the chief data officers and the VPs are going to be amazed by, even the CEO and the board. But the vast majority of the work that goes in for heads of digitization and OT and IT teams is data accessibility and connectivity. A second one being export controls compliance, dealing with the specific challenges of data and how to do this properly in a defense and aerospace environment. And once you get through that, the early phases of enablement and training with AI now in a secure environment. In this webinar, we're going to focus on the first two of these today. So let's start with data accessibility and connectivity. First, there's the importance of a secure broker to cloud architecture. To say something obvious to many folks, something that you don't do in aerospace and defense is directly open machines up to a public cloud environment and create new ports and security issues into your shop floor networks. You absolutely do not do that. You start with a bidirectional or control communication that is kept only inside the factory's existing secure network. You do not open new ports not approved in your architecture and how it works. But that creates the first challenge, because how do you, in fact, get the data from all these machines and systems into some kind of cloud environment where these AI-based systems need to reside, need to be trained, need to run inference? So an on-premise broker is what you need. Protocols such as MQTT, among others, a broker system that can sit on the edge and move to the cloud. Eric, one common question that people have when they're dealing with this is they think that the amount of data, they know how much data there is, and so they assume it might be just this overwhelming amount of data creating kind of crazy latency and burden. What is your practical experience with what kind of size of machine is needed for these on-premise brokers? And is it, bring down the network with latency ever?
Right. So fortunately, a middleware broker, such as the one we use, can be supported with just a ordinary virtual machine running on a typical Linux or VM machine on the company network. And for your real-time control operations, where you need to shut down the line instantly, those can function within the company network, so you can have millisecond turnaround times. Then for the more advanced dashboards and analytics that require cloud based capabilities, that data is sent off to the cloud, but it's possible to achieve 10-second latency from the moment the data leaves the machine on the factory floor to the moment the data shows up inside a cloud-based dashboard or sends a signal back, such as a action manager alert.
Yeah. So so common misnomer, as just said, is that you may need some, large, complicated cluster of machines. It's in fact, properly done an on-premise broker is small. The amount of data is not actually that large. The log files from an inspection machine might have thousands of lines, but that might equal tens of kilobytes or 100 kilobytes, which is a tiny amount of data from a cloud and latency perspective. So managed correctly, this is very possible. So number two, the key is to utilize a secure enterprise approved method to move between shop floor and business networks. Your specific company will have a given way to do this. The IT team knows about this well. So OT and IT collaboration on this. It may be the case that there are multiple networks that you actually need to set up proxies to jump through different networks from shop floor to business network. It may be that there's approved queues or protocols that need to be carried out. And maybe there's just a one step as well. There may be DMZ type zones as well, and other firewalls and things that need to be properly configured. The key is that data unification to cloud should be encrypted and one way only. So when you're properly setting up this architecture, you see you need minor resources at the edge, that you're not opening new ports that the IT security teams are unfamiliar with, and that this is going to be a one-way flow of data up to a secure cloud environment. Now, the cloud environment needs to be a single tenant cloud, not a public cloud. Two options. It can be a private corporate environment built by your own company, or it can be a secure third-party environment from a provider, such as Arch and others. That should be a single tenant environment, not a public cloud for aerospace and defense applications. Now, the second issue, besides just this hybrid edge and cloud architecture, is the importance of being able to access data from a huge variety of endpoints. This is true in manufacturing in general, but it's especially true in aerospace and defense. The goal, of course, again, is to have this unified data model, not just a unified namespace, not just the naming, but the whole model. So if you're building a robot, or sorry, you're optimizing a robot, you're optimizing an injection molding machine, you're optimizing a test area. You need a model of those test machines and what they're testing. And once you have that model, you can power the business KPIs, the AI guided actions, like we saw earlier, do various data exploration and analytics very powerfully. But first, you need to get this data from this huge variety of endpoints. So the first most common place in aerospace and defense manufacturing today is within sites directly from machines. And the reason is it is uncommon to see that this this data has already been concentrated into one single standard MES, for example, or into a secure data lake of some kind, such as GovCloud, AWS, Athena Lake, or such as a Snowflake. So typically what's needed is the ability to talk to a huge variety of protocols, things like MQTT and REST, but things like SexGem and CFX and Euromap, things like individual log file formats like XMLs and CSVs, OPC-UA, PLC tag mapping, and vendor proprietary protocols as well. It's important to figure out ways that you can both work with vendors that already have many of these protocols written and work with vendors that are capable of writing new ones rapidly, not taking months, but just weeks or even days to come up with new variations to the specific machines you have. Now, the second and third option is that you have higher concentration points of data already in your network, such as in MES systems or SCADAs that can be directly tapped into. This is a good thing. The more concentrated the data is, the more focused it is, the further you are ahead to getting to a unified data model and powering AI outcomes on top of it. So looking at your MES and SCADA is good, but also being honest about the degree to which the rich machine data is in fact already integrated into the MES, because it is often half and half. So if your organization is taking kind of a black and white perspective and saying, we should only connect to an MES or a SCADA, or we should only connect directly to machines, it's probably missing something. And as you start looking at given AI use cases, you may find you only have some of it. For example, common one, we just showed the AI guidance on error codes. You may find that none of those error codes are in your MES or even your SCADA. Or you may find that you have a common SCADA, OSI Pi, Ignition are shown on the slides here, and you have some of the PLC error codes, but not others. Or you have none of the error codes from a proprietary database, like a pick and place line or semiconductor. So these are the things that you have to think about. And finally, some organizations are starting to achieve globalized systems. Maybe they've standardized on their ERP or MES of choice, and maybe they're using one of the cloud providers like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft in a secure government cloud type environment and putting all the data into a data lake. This is great. And that can enable a faster access to this information to build it into the unified data model. So these are all key challenges that have to be overcome in an overall architecture. Companies like Arch and others can help guide and collaborate with heads of digitization that are trying to push these initiatives ahead in their particular companies. Now let's move to a second really challenging topic, which is export controls compliance. First, when you're talking about this topic, there's a tendency to kind of freeze up, because we know that a lot of the information in factories is export controlled. There are critical things being built for defense and other applications, and that information either needs to remain on premise entirely, or it needs to be filtered before it would go into AI, or it needs to only be used by AI if it's in a fully export controls compliant environment. And all three of those paths require careful concern about how it's done. Now, one of the reasons that leaders and organizations freeze up is they don't know where to start. They don't even know which information is considered export controlled because they have export controls experts, but those are not also experts in the data that is inside their machines in their MES. And the people that are experts in the data are not controls experts. And so facilitating a conversation between these different experts is one of the first steps. And as you do that, you start succeeding in getting folks talking about what is the export controlled data and what's not export controlled data, and how does that relate to the use cases that we're trying to drive. So we'll start with, what data do manufacturers typically consider export controlled? First is design files. If you have a complete design of a product, of a defense product, it is essentially always an export controlled piece of information. Another one is machine product recipes that contain bill of materials. Eric, what's an example? We have one listed here where we've seen a machine recipe be export controlled.
Sure. So manufacturers are commonly concerned about not wanting to allow the list of components that goes into making up a product to leave, they're secure, highly controlled environments. And so you need to watch out for any situation where a machine might publish or release that bill of materials or components of it. So an example of where that can come up is SMT, surface mount technology, pick and place machines that are used in electronics assembly commonly anonymize their component identifiers before they put them in a log file or a database. But sometimes the vendors have value added options. ASM has what they call a recipe optimizer, which causes more detailed information about the recipe and the actual identifiers of the original components to be saved in the attached database. So if a customer is using ASM pick and place machines with the recipe optimizer option enabled, then we make sure to configure our connector to avoid gathering that if that data is to be avoided.
That's a great example, Eric. Yeah, so the good news this is kind of one of the conclusions of this section, but a lot of the information in machines is kind of anonymized by default as it relates to export controlled information. And so it is the fact that a lot of these use cases can be powered, but it's not always the case. And we need to be 100% correct here. So this example of the ASM optimizer, the site place optimizer, putting richer information in is a great example of when you need to take care and then know that that is export controlled. A third example is image of products. This one's pretty clear to most folks and clear to export controlled experts. They're like, that's a picture of the product. That's obviously export controlled. This can happen from automatic optical inspection machines, AOIs, camera systems, on semiconductors, chips, injection molding, back-end, wherever it is. Direct pictures of the product are often in this category. Another one is identifiable product names with the list of materials. This is related to, we talked about this being inside a machine recipe, but this can just come directly from systems like the MES, Manufacturing Execution System, or the PLM, Product Lifecycle Management, that may be directly managing some of these files. And so if you're also leveraging this information for AI use cases, that's something to take account for. Another is custom product specific profiles or recipes. So there's other machines used in manufacturing which might not directly have the bill of materials, but they can have other information that is product specific. Eric, what's an example of this that we've seen?
Right. So in surface mount technology manufacturing, you've got ovens that bake the boards to fix the components to the boards. And there are standard oven temperature profiles. So that as a board goes through the oven, it goes one temperature, another temperature, and back down. But sometimes it's necessary to use a custom bake profile to manufacture a very specific product. And in that case, the custom bake profile for a ITAR covered product may itself be considered ITAR covered data.
So the secondary design information is something to consider, again, in conversation between your ITAR controls experts and data experts working together. What are things that are typically not considered export controlled? So we just talked about kind of custom profiles of an oven, or custom profiles of a given fabrication machine. Well, standard third-party recipes are typically not considered controls. This is a standard way to bake a circuit board. This is a standard way to do an electrical conductivity test. That is not considered export controlled. It doesn't have any information about the specific product that you're doing. Likewise, anonymized product recipe names, anonymized product IDs, so that you're able to track, I built 5 things, I had 5 jobs, but not what you built. That has not been considered export controlled in any example. Business KPIs, the availability of the lines, how much they're up, the performance, the UPH, the quality numbers overall, 98% versus 99% yield, line utilizations, rework, mean times to response. Is it taking you 5 minutes or 10 minutes? How mean time between failure. These have never been considered export controlled. Machine error codes that don't reveal part numbers, like error code 2252 that tells you a camera needs to be calibrated. That is not considered export controlled. And that means this information could be used both in a fully export compliant environment and in an environment that is commercial cloud, for example, or GovCloud environment that's not FedRAMPed. This information can also be used to drive AI use cases, and machine performance data as well that doesn't reveal part numbers, cycle times, takt times, stops, state changes, setup times, and changeover times. Now, there's a fork in the road here with the information. You can see that there's a lot of information that relates to AI optimization use cases for manufacturing production that is not export controlled. And there's other very interesting information like design files and link to key reference designators, custom specific recipes that are. And so one path that manufacturers can take is they can build their own government cloud type environments. They can seek FedRAMP approval, use only US persons, and work with third parties as well, either inside of their own private cloud networks or third parties that likewise have a government cloud environment FedRAMPed with a US persons only team to look at the entirety of the data. The other path, which is also viable, can be lower cost and very advantageous, is to carefully look at the data, use the majority of the data, which is not export controlled, ensure a screening process, and enable many of these AI use cases in either a commercial or GovCloud that is not export controlled. We're going to end with a third-party example of that exactly because it's a common one where we can do cost-effective work to advance US manufacturing and aerospace defense manufacturing generally with these AI technologies. So Eric, please close us out by explaining this specific use case of how do you screen the information to be able to do AI use cases in a commercial or GovCloud environment at lower cost?
Right. So what you're seeing here is the default data pipeline that is used by our Artifacts solution for gathering data from custom machines. So everything you see here on this slide at the top is going on inside the customer's network on premises. So you've got your customer infrastructure off on the left, including the machines that are generating the data. And then we have a connector that sends that data into our middleware broker. And the middleware broker then looks at and processes that data. By default, our broker will send all of the raw data to the cloud, so you have a permanent record of all the data that was gathered in case you want to enhance your analytics in the future with new capabilities that it didn't have in the past. The broker also processes the data to standardize it, so it's easier for our solution to generate high-performance analytics dashboards and do machine learning and AI inference. Okay, so our broker will by default be sending raw data and standard messages to the cloud. Let's go look at the next slide. So let's say that you determine that some of that data is ITAR covered and should not be sent to the cloud. Well, fortunately, the on-premises middleware broker is the perfect place to filter that data out. The broker already processes all of the data, so all we have to do is configure our connector and broker to filter out the data that is export controlled and send the rest of the data up to the cloud. And this means that our customers can benefit from cutting-edge cloud-based artificial intelligence and analytics when building ITAR-covered products without having to send any ITAR-covered data to the cloud.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Eric. So we're done here. So let me take a look and see if we had any questions that came in. Do you see there's several here? Let's see. I may need to bring down the screen so I can see these. Let me stop sharing. Okay, here we go. Yeah, a couple questions have come in. All right, first question. I think this one's good for you, Eric. How do you work with a customer to develop a specific strategy to ensure ITAR compliance?
Right. So we consider our customers the experts on ITAR and their own strategy for complying with it. So we begin by sitting down with the customer's trade compliance team and doing a structured interview. We have a ITAR compliance enablement framework that we've developed, and we walk them through this and ask them a list of questions about what data they do and don't consider ITAR covered. We kind of anticipate the answers we expect to get, but we don't want to make any assumptions. We have the customer guide us. And then we ask them to explain the customer's strategy for complying with ITAR, because different customers do have different approaches to ensuring compliance with federal regulations. We then introduce the trade compliance team to what our solution is, what data it gathers, and what our solution does, so they have a degree of understanding about our software. And then we work together to develop an agreement on how we and the customer will work together to ensure compliance with ITAR at all times. That agreement will include some commitments by things the customer will do and some things that Arch will do. For example, the customer might decide they just want to never turn on the recipe optimizer option for ASM pick and place machines on their side, right? Or they might decide, actually, we want to take advantage of that feature, so we want to make certain that you configure Arch FX to filter out that identifying component information that would be submitted by that feature. So we just work out an agreement between us about what they will do and what we will do, and then we agree to that in writing as a basis to ensure compliance by all staff on both sides.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric, for that. Yeah, and I'll add one layer on top of that. And so the majority of customers that are working with us are seeking to optimize their factories. And so having low-cost solutions to create rapid ROI is the priority. Working in a non-export controlled environment is therefore the priority. But the other path that we do engage with customers as well is identifying the high-value use cases that could be possible because of export controlled data and working towards a GovCloud and FedRAMP approved environment, either on their side or in their cloud. So second question here, I think we've got time for one or two more. So the second question that came in was, can't you just work on premise and avoid the cloud altogether? So that's a common question. I'm going to assume that the person is saying, can't you still do AI use cases like we showed at the beginning on premise and avoid the cloud? Because if you're not doing AI, if you're just running a Power BI dashboard, for example, on a number of units completed, that is possible to do on premise. People have been doing that for a long time. But AI, no, you really can't run these AI systems with inference and training and using the latest engines on premise. I guess for whoever asked or for anyone else asking this question, I'd ask, does your organization have a cluster of GPUs or resources? Is there a large language model or some of these new AI models available on premise anywhere in your organization? Probably not, but most likely your organization is building a government cloud strategy with access to resources in the cloud. For example, if you use AWS GovCloud, they have a service called Bedrock, which makes the Claude Sonnet models available within a compliant environment. Or if you work with third parties like Arch, we have a path. So generally speaking, no, it's not possible to be only on premise, but that hybrid is required because of that. We had a couple more questions, but I think we're at time. And actually, the next question was about other AI use cases, the third one. And that's something I think we're going to talk about in a next webinar. So thanks again for everyone that joined live. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for everyone that's listening to the recording. Thanks, Eric, for joining as well.